I really appreciate you all taking the time this afternoon to join us for today's iROC presentation. I'm Barbara Petrozelli. I'm the director of the library here at the Mount. And on behalf of my co-conspirators in the whole iROC enterprise, who are Vivian Milzarski, also from the library, and Evan Merkhofer from the Division of Natural Sciences, we're so pleased to have you with us. Evan's unable to be with us this afternoon, but he's with us in spirit, of course. For those of you for whom this might be your first iROC, iROC stands for Investigating Research on Campus. And it's a bi-weekly series where we get to explore the research activities of not only our faculty, but also our students, and on today's occasion, also our alums. So it's a wonderful way to learn more about what's actually happening at Mount St. Mary College that you might not encounter, in your everyday courses and activities. I mentioned it's bi-weekly, so we'll have another iROC seminar 2 weeks from today on Thursday, October 15th. That one will be at 4 p.m. and it will be led by Dr. Charles Zola from our Division of Philosophy and Religious Studies. Before we start the presentation, I just have a few housekeeping things that I want to review with everybody. We are recording the presentation. You're not obligated to leave your video on, so if you're more comfortable turning that off, that's perfectly okay. Tony and Kyle are going to manage the chat, so if you have observations or questions or whatever, you can certainly put that up in there. Those of you who are attending for FYE credit, for our first year experience program, we're going to use the login information for this session for that attendance, and we'll send that on to the FYE folks. So there's nothing further that you have to do other than be here and enjoy the presentation. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is for any community members who might be joining us today who are not generally a faculty, staff, or student at Mount St. Mary College, and you'd like to know more about events that are hosted by Kaplan Family Library, you can also use the chat to give us your email address, and we'd be happy to add you to the notification list for other things that we have coming up. So thank you again for spending this time with us, and I'm going to turn this over now to Vivian to introduce today's special guests.
Okay. Kyle Grappone is the founder of The Next Step, a coaching company that focuses on helping students and graduates find direction in their career by providing clarity and accountability. He's also a published author, motivational speaker, and brand strategist. His goal is to help people from all walks of life take control of their future and careers. Kyle is a 2010 graduate from Mount St. Mary College with a bachelor's degree in public relations. Dr. Anthony Scardillo is an award-winning advertising, marketing, and business professional with over 30 years experience in international, national, regional, state, and local advertising, marketing, and sales. His research focuses on improving the workplace environment by creating fun and engaging cultures for employees. You will often hear him lament, "Are we having fun yet?" Scardillo is a member of the American Marketing Association and the Academy of Management. Tony earned a Doctor of Management degree from the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University, as well as an MBA from the Huether School of Business at the College of St. Rose. Tony and Kyle connected at a real-world event here at the college, which led to their collaboration on a mixed method research project that they will discuss today. Please welcome Tony and Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Really great to see so many faces and some old faces that I haven't seen in a while, some former students of mine, and some new faces. So that's really great. Kyle, say hello.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. As always, I'm excited when I get to come back to the Mount and educate and engage. I really appreciate that introduction that Vivian gave me. Just to add on to it very briefly, one of the main reasons, as we'll talk about today, one of the main reasons I started my organization and did this research study is because I found right after college that a number of people I worked with seemed to be very dissatisfied with their careers. And I also found that there was a gap between what graduates knew and what they were able to handle and what they were expected to handle. So that was kind of the genesis for not only the study, but a lot of the things that I've done. So I'm looking forward to having this conversation today. And I really encourage questions because anytime I speak, when we do get questions, that's usually when the best conversations happen.
Yeah, exactly. Kyle's going to be monitoring the chat room for us. I'm going to be working the PowerPoint. So feel free at any point if you have a question that you want to ask, you can drop it right in the chat room. Or if even you want to add some input to the presentation, feel free. And then Kyle or even Vivian, if you're watching, you can jump in as well. I'm going to assume
Dr.
everybody can.
Scardillo?
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I've just looked at my chat box and I have no history in here. So if people were sending messages, I'm not getting them. So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to monitor this.
Yeah. Okay, Vivian, why don't you take a look at the chat box? There's 2 or 3 things in there. Actually, no. Yeah, Matt Frey just gave us an everyone test.
I just got the one from Matt, so I guess.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. Then we're on the same sheet of music. Kind of a little overview of what we're doing today. We're going to kind of talk about the overviews, why we're here together, what causes the causes, and then we're going to talk about our methodology, a discussion of our facts and figures, and then we're going to wrap up with the conclusion of this. I'm going to start off by the first thing I like to do is do what we call a litmus test in the business. And I was kind of hoping I could do this as a poll and see how everybody answers this question. Unfortunately, I don't have the poll feature available to me. But here's the question for the students that are out there today. I want to ask you a question. And the question is, as you can see, how many students make their own doctor's appointments? So if you make your own doctor's appointment, raise your hand. Of course, you're probably not on camera, so I wouldn't know that. Okay, I see people are putting in the chat room that they're raising their hands. That's kind of our litmus test here. And you'll see why when we get into this presentation. What we find is that students who are making their making their own doctor's appointments are the ones that oftentimes are in the better shape. But so I'll start off, Kyle, why don't you kind of started to tell your story. So I'll kind of add to my the story here. Kyle and I first met just about 2 years ago. Kyle was here at the school and was giving a presentation, and he really has some spectacular stories. And I was listening to him and he was talking about how students are unprepared for the real world. And many of the stories that he shared, I just really resonated with me. And, were things that I, as a business professional through the years, would often remark about fresh out of college. And then when I started here at the Mount, I remember sitting in on a career center meeting that we invited business people from the outside the world, if you will. And several of the things they lamented about was, boy, people don't know how to write an email. And I don't think it's just something that's particular to the Mount. I think this is really more of a fundamental issue that we're having with just general college students. So that's kind of how we started out on this journey together. Here's some data that is really disturbing in a lot of ways and very sobering in a lot of ways. And I've got all the data or the reference material to support all this documentation. In particular, we've seen, when we talk about marketing, we talk about the value of the proposition. Is it worth it for me is the question that your consumers are always asking. And so in this business of college education, of higher education, we've seen a tremendous rise in the price of a college tuition. And I'm speaking generally here. I'm not just talking about the Mount here. And yet at the same time, we're seeing some tremendous declines in enrollment. We're seeing a tremendous lack of preparedness of the students that are coming out of college. So they're paying a lot of money and they're getting out of college and not really being prepared for the real world. There's a big rift in who's responsible for this? And it's very interesting to listen to the different parties talk about this. There's a group that say the blame is on the parents. Come back to what I was asking before about making your own doctor's appointments. There are many people that are saying it's the burden of the parents to be educating their children on these techniques. And yet there's another group of people that say this is something that they should be learning in college. These are skills they should be learning in college. So it's really a very black and white issue here as to, you know, who's the one responsible for it. And the other part of this too, and this kind of comes into some of my research, is that they often select the wrong career path. You know, I'll be very honest with you guys. I started out in college as a college freshman in pre-med because my parents wanted me to be a dentist, you know? And, you know, I was like, well, I lasted about half a semester in pre-med. But I liked communications and ultimately got into communications, advertising, journalism. So. Kyle, comments that you want to make here?
Sure. I think that the slide about responsibility is very interesting because, you know, as I said, I have spent the last few years speaking on similar topics. And, you know, like I said, the origin of this was when I started to work in corporate America, I started to talk to a number of coworkers and they talked about how they weren't prepared. And then when I repeat that and I say today's graduates aren't prepared, sometimes there is that defensive mechanism that goes up from certain people who may say, well, that's not my fault. And I've never been one to place blame. I don't think that that really works. I think we need to kind of work towards solutions. But I think the responsibility part falls a little bit on everybody because first and foremost, yes, it falls on the parents. I think the parents, to a degree, have to understand that, you know, if you're going, you know, when your child is young, you do everything for them. But there needs to be some sort of weaning off process because otherwise, it's basically your kids are going to have to quit cold turkey in a sense, and they're not going to know what to do, and that could have some long-term ramifications. You know, it's not just missing a doctor's appointment; it's maybe missing a credit card payment, or messing up your student loans, or not getting a housing form in on time, or something of that nature. So I think it does fall a little bit on the students. I fall a little bit on the parents, but also it also falls on the school and the parents and the students to understand why these skills are important. Because, for example, Mount St. Mary College could announce tomorrow that they're going to create a full semester course that tackles being prepared for the real world. But the students may not really understand, why is that useful? Why is that so valuable? I can't tell you how many wonderful events that the Mounts put on that I didn't go to, that I regret not going to because I didn't take the time to think to myself, why is this valuable to me? So again, it's not necessarily the college's fault because they do things to prepare, but maybe the student doesn't understand why it's so important. So I think it's, I don't like to place blame, but I think if we're talking about responsibility moving forward, it's kind of a combination. And then to touch on the wrong career path point, that is something that I have talked to a number of people. Like I said in the intro, I'm a clarity coach, so I talk to graduates a lot of times about switching careers and starting side hustles. And the real problem seems to be, again, is that they don't really understand what the options are when they go to school. So they select something that, like Dr. Scardillo said, their parents want them to do, or something they think is going to make them a lot of money, instead of really educating themselves and understanding what is the day-to-day like. So,
and that kind of dovetails into my research about having fun at work. You pick the wrong career path, you don't have fun at work. So yeah, you know, it all kind of blends all together. Some of the causes we talked about is, you know, one of the actually ideas, there's a couple of ideas being proposed right now about this, and one of which is to build a 4-year curriculum that would include for like years 1 and 2, you know, going to local businesses, simulation games, and peer review activities, which, you know, I've started incorporating these into some of my curriculum. And then for juniors and seniors, and this is getting a lot of traction. And again, this is something I've been adding to my 300 and 400 level classes, is semester-long group projects that be actually in some instances are carried from one semester to the other. So just some ideas that we talk about. Okay. Kyle and I set out when we first started this. I'm going to give a shout out and a props to my my alma mater, Case Western Reserve, because they were the ones that really got me involved with doing the mixed methods research study. What that involved was to do a qualitative study followed by a quantitative study. So we did a series of interviews with about 25 people that were face to face, and then based on that, we were able to garner 4 different themes that we will be talking about great extensively. We ended up breaking the participants into 2 categories: employers of college graduates and recent college grads. Good. Some of the 4 themes that came out of the face-to-face interviews were the need for organizational skills, the need for communication skills, and then 2 that were kind of not surprising, but we kind of called them the college experience and then corporate culture. And so that's kind of how we started this whole thing. We collected the data for the quantitative, the survey part of this, between July and November 2019. You pretty much can see how we organized this. It was pretty well broken out into grads and employers. I think we might have also done gender-based as well. I can't remember from a demographic point of view. What we found out when we did the interviews, the qualitative study, were 4 really distinct themes that came out of it. The need for organizational skills, college experience, and we'll talk about that, corporate culture, and communication skills. Kyle, you want to talk about any of those?
Sure. I will say that one of the things that surprised me in this study was how low the percentage was for communication skills. I would say that probably is not, that number is probably the one number that I don't know how, I wouldn't say it's not accurate, but I would like to maybe, if I was to do another study, to dive more into that, because I believe from my own personal research that I've done and conversations I've had, communication is a big problem. I speak sometimes, I do workshops with high school students on the topic of social media. And, you know, the issue with social media is that today's teenagers are on their phones, and, you know, when they're on their phones, they're only talking to people they like. They're only viewing content that agrees with them. Whenever they need something, they text somebody for it. And the analogy I always give is, you know, if you're always on your phone, you basically come out of your hole, you ask somebody for something, you don't say thank you, you take it, and you go back into your hole. Yeah. So I think communication skills, even though the number is at 58, I think is probably right up there with all 3. And corporate culture, I think, is something that's very important, that I think students may not know what that is. That's something that I think that they should be educated on, because I've worked for, you know, I worked for incredibly successful companies that had a terrible culture that I needed to leave. And I worked for companies that had a wonderful culture that couldn't make a dollar to save their life. Yeah. So there's that combination that needs to come into play when you're researching companies. So we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, you're right about that. And you know what's going to be striking about this, when we get into talking about the survey results, we're going to see that that actually is bumped up quite a bit more. That many of them, and especially when it comes to verbal communications. I noted in the chat, Sean had made a very nice comment and, you know, agreed with it. I'm sure many of you were able to read it about, you know, how important these skills are. So yeah, it was kind of interesting, and we're going to get in expanding into these on the next couple of slides. With organizational skills, some of the sub-themes that came out of this was, and really the big one here, is the thinking critically and being able to solve problems. That was really important. The next subset of themes under the college experience, and this was kind of interesting, the work as an intern. Remember that, because we'll come back to that in the quantitative, the survey part of this. Also, the other thing that struck us was the high GPA, whether or not that's necessary, and whether or not being involved in extracurricular and volunteer activities was significant. Kyle?
So one of the bullet points I want to mention, and I just want to preface this with saying that this is a very personal statement, so other people may completely disagree with this, but in my 10 years, and I've gone on more interviews than most graduates because I've had some hard luck with some companies, you know, and I've
Poor
had to
Kyle.
move on quicker. But I've never been asked my GPA in a single interview I've ever been in. Now, I'm not saying GPA isn't important,
Right.
but I've never listed it on my resume. It's never been asked of me in any interview. And I think if I had to tell you how many of the online applications ask it, it's probably less than 25%. So what does that mean? I'm not sure, but that's something I tend to point out because I've never been asked that before. Now, again,
Yeah.
I'm in the communications field. Perhaps other fields probably ask more of it. I will say that what I have been asked on several occasions is what courses did I take? And can I speak about the projects that I did in those courses? Can I speak about the skills that I learned in those courses? Because I think for these employers, they don't necessarily want to know, oh, you got, you know, I could say I had a 3.9, they'd have to go check that. But if they ask me, what did you learn in intro to search engine optimization marketing? And I can't tell you, well, then you know that I'm, you know, not for real. So I would say that that's kind of my comment on that.
And, you know, that's true, you know, and we see so many students today that are obsessed over getting the good grades. And, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, you know, C's are good. What I'm saying is that, you know, it's okay to get a C plus, B minus every once in a while. And, you know, getting the B pluses is okay as well. So, you know, I think that it's more important that you don't get so absorbed with it. And yeah, poor Kyle has shared with me some of the stories of his journey. And there was this
That's
preschool.
why I work for myself now. That's why I run my own business.
This preschool journey that he worked with, and oh boy.
Oh yeah, I forgot I told you that story. That's for another presentation.
With the corporate culture, now this actually came out as a very important theme as we followed up in the survey. Understanding a corporate culture was really very important for both ends of the spectrum. Being able to work in a team and having good work ethic was, especially having the enthusiasm towards the tasks. These were all very important sub-themes that we'll talk about. Kyle?
Yeah, I think corporate culture is interesting because it's something that I don't think I really thought about until I found myself in poor cultures. But, you know, corporate culture, for those out there that might not fully understand what that means, it's about the environment that you work in. It's about the morals, values that the company follows or doesn't follow. A company culture could be very sales oriented. If you're working for a new company, everything could be about sales because they need to hit certain targets to stay afloat. You know, it could be about, you know, always doing the right thing by the customer, even if it means making less money. Again, it's just those type of things that you need to understand because some companies require, you know, a very cutthroat, quick deadlines, long hours. And if you believe in the mission, you'll have no problem with that. But if you don't believe in it, and that's not something that you want to work hard towards, then you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation.
Yeah, very true, very true. Our next one was communication skills, and we're going to talk about this, especially when it comes into the quantitative study, the survey. But, you know, we saw a lot of things about the ability to communicate with persons inside and outside of the organization. And also the amount of accuracy was also important. We found a lot of issues with that. Yeah, okay, good. I'm going to move forward to the next one. What we then did was, here are some of the quotes from our interviews that I kind of wanted to talk about. And Kyle, I'll let them take a minute to read that. And Kyle, you want to talk about, so here are organizational skills that employers talked about. Kyle?
Sure. So when we talk about organizational skills, it's a number of things, and you have to think about what kind of skills do you need to perform your job and what is your employer looking for. So for example, your employer is going to have no time if you say you lost something, if you didn't bring the correct document to the meeting, if you didn't deliver something you were supposed to deliver. If you're working in an organization that is client facing, so a lot of times that's agencies, you know, the client is king because the client is the one that's paying the bills in a sense. So you want to make sure that you have some sort of organizational system where you don't miss client emails. You don't miss deadlines. For myself, every job I've ever had, I've had a personal to-do list that's been my own because I know what I have to do each day. And I've seen people who don't do that and they miss things. And the problem is that once they miss things, they don't know how to tell somebody that they messed up because they never learned how to deal with conflict. So now all of a sudden their poor organizational skills get worse because they have poor communication skills.
Right.
So that goes into
the two,
that.
we found a lot of crossover here between the organizational skills and the communication skills, frankly. But the key here, I think that we kept hearing from people was the idea of critical thinking and problem solving. These were two issues that came out very prominent in many of the people we spoke with. Even the recent grads really talked about it, and said that if you can't make promises, you're not going. If you can't keep your promises, forget about it. So yeah, we found this to be very important. We next talked about the college experience, and here are some of the quotes that we got from our employers and what they said. Especially, I'm going to talk more about the idea of internships. Kyle, what do you think about internships?
I think internships are arguably the most important part of the college experience, or at least right up there with anything else, because an internship, if done correctly on both ends, gives you an opportunity to understand what that job is like, to understand what the day-to-day is like, but it also gives you a chance to make some mistakes. Because when you have the label of an intern, people understand that your email might be unclear. People understand that your presentation might be a little long or a little dry. And most of them will help you kind of clean that up. But if you make those mistakes in the real world, that the consequences are much more dire. Now, I think internships have a long way to go, because I think the problem we have on both ends is, one, I think a lot of students unfortunately look at an internship and say, well, I'm not being paid. So immediately, compensation drives motivation. That's what we say in the business world. Compensation drives motivation. And at times, a student might not be motivated because they're not getting paid monetarily. However, that's where the parent and maybe even the professor needs to step in and really kind of draw them a roadmap so they understand that the compensation you get is experience that goes on your resume, and that resume gets you a job, which gets you the career that you studied for. And I think on the other end is that we have to hold companies responsible for delivering an internship that, one, includes responsibilities that are important, that are not completely entry level. Yes, some of them will be entry level, but at least lets the intern sit in on meetings, be a part of discussions, but also values the intern and gives them something to do. Because unfortunately, a lot of companies will make a list of work that nobody wants to do. They'll hire a summer intern, and that summer intern leaves learning nothing. So I think it's also on a college to make sure that they're vetting their companies properly. And as somebody who had a close relationship with Kathleen O'Keefe, who used to run the Career Center and doesn't anymore, I know that was something that was very important to them. She would speak to me often about, just in generalities, about how they would vet their company. So I think, as an intern, you need to know, why am I going with this company and what do I want to achieve, but also make sure that you're interning, with a company that's been vetted by somebody that's been there before.
I had an intern 2 years ago. He's since graduated, a wonderful student of mine. And he came to me after the end of a semester at the internship, and he said to me, I'm really glad I did this internship because I don't really like what this was, and he liked being in marketing, but this was more forward facing. This was more client facing, and he more in the research and the database kind of stuff. So it was a good opportunity for him to find out that he really didn't want to be front facing. He would be more suitable for work in the back. So yeah, it really is very valuable to people. Good points. And then recent grads say the same thing about this, really, and Kyle is right. It's got to have the internship has to have meat to it. Frankly, I did an internship when I was in college, and basically all I did was answer the phone, and that was really all they gave me to do. Didn't learn much. Good phone technique, I guess. Hello and welcome. How are you today? Corporate culture, it really is about the fit. And, come back to what we said earlier about the GPA. I've talked to so many people in the business world who say, I'm hiring the smile. I'm not hiring the brain. I can train the brain to do what I need it to do. But if you don't have that internal mechanism, if you don't have that heart, I don't necessarily need you. Kyle, what do you say?
I completely agree. I think a lot of what employers look for is an attitude, is a passion, is examples of applying yourself. But I think it's also, as you grow a little bit in your career, it's about being able to prove that you've done what you're being hired to do. Classic example actually happened yesterday, believe it or not. I've hired somebody for my organization on a freelance basis to run some marketing, advertising campaigns, email sequencing, and a bunch of other stuff I won't bore you with. And she's done it for years. She's wonderful. She's amazing. She was a great find. She's very well priced. And it wasn't until yesterday that I actually found out she technically never graduated college. She had some college, but she never actually graduated. And I never asked because because my first and only questions were, show me what you've done. And when I saw she could do what I needed her to do, the rest didn't matter. So yeah. I think that that's something that is important. Again, this goes back to the internship. If you can find an internship where you can do things that you can then talk about in an interview, that's huge. Because I tell a lot of my clients who are students, when you graduate college, you look like, on paper, like a lot of other people. You come from similar schools, you have similar degrees, so but it's those internships that you can say, I did this project, I worked on this person will write, give you a reference and tell you how well I did. Those are the type of things that kind of stand out. And then as far as culture is concerned, that's something that can be its own presentation. But again, it's really about fitting into what the other people in that organization are like. Because a lot of companies want people who will work with other people, who are collaborative, who take ownership of their own mistakes, who are friendly, who will, talk to people outside of work. And a lot of companies are looking for people that aren't going to necessarily jet out the door at 5 o'clock. And the companies that are like that for a reason.
Yeah, very true. I actually tell students that they should stalk the business that they're going to and watch the exodus if it happens at 5 p.m. If people start pouring out of the back of the building, it means they're ready to get out of there, and there's a reason. Kyle, a couple of quick notes in the chat room. Two things. First, Peter Gregory put a really great note in there, and thank you very much for that. But Anne Marie also asked about apprenticeships and doing a year apprenticeship and take a gap year, if you will. I think that has pros and cons to it. I really like the idea of the immersion, the whole year immersion. Here's the problem. The student really needs to know they've got to make that commitment that they've got to go back to school after that year, because now they start getting that paycheck and they think, oh yeah, well, that's all I'm going to do. So you really have to be motivated to get back to school at the end of that year. Good points on both. And then when we talk about the corporate culture, here's a quote from one of the students, and they pretty much basically agree with that. So, and then when we talk about communication skills, it kind of comes back to what we said before. Talking clearly and concisely, building relationships are so important. The idea of selling value to others. Likewise, with recent grads, this is really some great quotes from there. Especially this top one. And so many students know that I make a point of calling on them in class because of this, because I want to give them the opportunity and I challenge them, come on, are you really mean that? Or what do you think about that? Kyle, what about that?
Well, when it comes to, like I said, with communication, I think communication is such a big problem, because I think, kind of to change topic a little bit on this, one of the things I wanted to make sure I brought up was that I've noticed that a lot of recent graduates don't really know how to take feedback. They don't know how to take constructive criticism. One of the things that I've always kind of prided myself on is, you can tell me what I'm doing well, but let's get past that. And I'd like to know what you think could improve, because I don't just want to be a B+ player forever. I want to be an A+ player, but not everybody has that type of mindset. And I think it's about taking that feedback. It's about taking that constructive criticism. But it's also about learning how to talk to people who are older than you, people who are in, higher positions than you. I think one of the skills that, gets lost is called managing up. I think one of the best skills I had in corporate America before I left was my ability to manage up, because I realized that if my goals and my initiatives and my objectives were going to be reached, I had to manage my boss, and I had to get in front of him when I had to get in front of him. And I also had to be real about, okay, this is my boss's weaknesses. I would never say this to his face, but I know what his weaknesses are, and I know what I need to do, and I know where I need to steer him. And again, I keep that information myself. I don't go around to people and be like, hey, let me tell you what my boss is weak about, because that's not professional. But when you know where your boss needs help, you can become that kind of that invaluable part of the team. You might not always be recognized for it, but internally you know that you're valued.
Yeah, and the better you make him look, the better he's going to make you look.
Yep.
Very true. Very true. Okay, so we turned, once we identified all these themes, we next turned into the quantitative, the survey end of this. And I wanted to point out, we used a 5-point Likert scale. Some people call it a Likert scale, but I call it a Likert scale. And it was based on a 5-point scale that talked about extremely important, very important, moderately important, slightly, and not important at all. And, you know, one of the things is there are 1,000,001 ways to slice and dice this data. So what we decided was we kind of drew a line in the sand and said, we're going to only look at the people who responded extremely important and very important. And so as we move forward, you're going to see some areas where, first off, we're going to see a little bit of a difference in the both, because what we did was we separated this into the recent grads and the employers. So you're going to see some differences there, but you also have to understand there's probably, and we'll talk about a couple of points where there's more in the moderately important. Now, we have all of that data in our study. But I just didn't want to kind of like throw 500 slides at you with graphs and charts on them. So just kind of, if you want that kind of information and want to delve into it, certainly happy to move forward. When we talk about organizational skills, the big one here was leadership skills, was one that really, we saw a big disparity in this, where we see the employers, and well, first off, we see that both the employers and grads really was a very low percentage of them that really thought that this was very important. But either way, it was definitely the employers really believe that, we don't need college grads to have leadership skills at this point. We want them to develop them, whereas the kids coming out of college think that, oh, I've got to be rah, rah, rah. Kyle, you want to point out anything else about the data here?
Sure. I think with leadership skills, it's important that when you're a college graduate, it's not about having leadership skills, it's about being coachable and listening and being open-minded. Because if you're open-minded, people will, again, it goes back to that constructive feedback. If you really dig into it, feedback is not meant to criticize you, it's meant to help you. And if you want to be a leader, which is a very vague term in my opinion, but I won't get into too much into that. But if you want to be a leader, or what you envision a leader being, you have to be coached. You have to be coached by other leaders. And I think so it's more about, having those communication skills. But as you can see, leadership skills is at 44, but that doubles when we go to possesses organizational skills, because that's something they're expecting on day one, because that's something that they feel like you should have learned in college. You should be organized already.
Yeah, a great observation there, Kyle. And and both parties, the recent grads and the employers, do feel strongly the same way about that. The next set of data was the college experience, and again, we asked the same. We broke this out into two groups: the employers of graduates and the recent grads, and we asked them the same questions, and that's kind of how we got this and set this up. And I want to point out this big disparity in the work as an intern prior to graduation. Obviously, you can see that there's a higher, the employers don't regard it as significant as the graduates do. But let's remember, we're looking at the very important and extremely important sectors here. When I went back to check the data, we've got a very high number in that moderately group. So it's not that they don't necessarily value it as much. It's just that it's not like, stop the bus, we need to get off kind of thing. And with both groups, it was a very low percentage were the very important. Again, the other thing to point out is the low number of people that say having a high GPA is important. In both instances, very few of them believe that it's important to have a high GPA, and they pretty much are very consistent with that. Kyle, want to talk about those numbers?
I think we talked pretty much about GPA and
Yeah.
extracurricular activity, so I think we could probably move on.
Okay. The next one was corporate culture. And, this big one that really sticks out in my mind, and especially since it's such a high percentage, is the enthusiasm towards the task that they're assigned. I always hear students grumble about assignments, and it's very obvious. They don't, I have to do this, and why do I have to do this with this group? And that's something you have to be very careful about when you do that in the real world. Kyle, you want to talk about that, or any of the other data points?
Sure, I would love to talk about enthusiasm. So just to be clear, to be enthusiastic about something doesn't mean you have to jump up and down or be excited in a sense.
Be like me, right?
But it's about your body language. It's about your nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
If your boss is giving you stuff and before you really learn what it is, you're showing your disapproval on how you don't want to do it, that's going to register, and they're going to remember that when it comes time to giving out the more important assignments.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's important is that if you're getting given a task, you really have to think about, why am I doing this? What is it working towards? Because I've done several tasks that were very mundane and tedious, but they were important. They were crucial to the project. There was nothing exciting about them, but they were crucial. So I did it with enthusiasm because I was working on the project and I was helping, to gain that objective. But I will say this, if you are finding yourself not being enthused about anything you're doing, if every single task seems like it's really wearing you down, you're probably in the wrong career, because there's always going to be things that you don't want to do. Even though I run my own business, there's things I have to do sometimes that I don't want to do, but you have to do them. But the majority of what I do is something I enjoy. But if you're every day, everything is a task and everything is a drag, then you probably need to reevaluate really why that is. Because if you're working on things that are important and you still find to have no enthusiasm, then that is an issue.
Yeah, I can come back to my research on having fun at work, and the second and third most important reasons why employees have fun at work is that the work is meaningful and it's challenging work to them. So that really is important. If you really aren't really that enthusiastic about the work you're doing, you really should be looking at a different career path. And to be honest with you, that's how I ended up in higher education. I was working for a nonprofit and really just very, my career was stalled and I was very stagnant and I didn't like what I was doing. And I was doing some part-time teaching, and I quit full-time work altogether, went back to school, and unfortunately, here I am. You guys are stuck with me, right? Thanks, Ludmilla. Yes, you're right about any profession having enthusiasm and passion is so true, so true. The other thing I wanted to note here is, the ability to work in the team structure. Saw both groups score very high on that, and that's so important too. Many student athletes get that, but if you're not on a team in a participatory sport, sometimes that does get lost. Okay, I think this is our last group. I'm not sure about that, but we talk about some of the communication skills, and all of these really scored very high. And what was really nice about all of them is that they all not only scored very high, but there was a definite agreement in all of the different groups. Very little disparity among the groups. Kyle, tell me what you think about this.
So I think what's important is when we talk about oral and written skills, I don't think anybody's expecting you to be a master presenter, but I do think you're expected to articulate your ideas, articulate your thoughts, and you're also expected to defend your ideas.
Yep.
If you come into a meeting and you say, I think we should purchase this product to solve this problem, you need to defend that. Very few companies can you just buy things without giving a reason. I worked for a company that had so much money that you could just buy things for no reason, and then that became a problem. because people were buying things that maybe they didn't necessarily need. And especially now in this new economic climate that we find ourselves in, with budgets tightening, you need to be able to defend your ideas. One thing I will say is, if you have a problem, try to attach some sort of a solution to that problem, or at least the start of a solution. If something is wrong, if a process is broken, come into the meeting and say, listen, this process is broken. Here's where I think we can start. And even if your boss says, no, that's not the right starting point, and he takes it over and gives you a totally different solution, at least you did something. At least you brought something to the table. Because it's a lot better to do that than to just come in and be the guy who complains about everything but doesn't know how to actually fix it. So that's kind of what I would say here. And then ability to gather information. I mean, I think one of the best things you can do as an entry-level employee is position yourself as somebody who can gather information for somebody who has to put together a report. And you can learn a lot that way. You research that way. You understand how reports are put together that way. But if a busy executive knows they can tap you and say, hey, can you put together this information, and you really put time and energy into it, and you find information that maybe is, you have to dig a little deeper on Google to find it, that can make yourself very valuable as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of nice remarks in there about from Matt I saw. Yes, you're absolutely correct about that. Being able to ask questions and provide solutions. We were talking in class the other day about negative Nancy, a term that I like to use, and how, this kind of comes back to what we were talking about before with the corporate culture. Having that enthusiasm for the job is, also being able to provide solutions and, communicating what those solutions are. So there's kind of a little bit of crossover going on here, which is kind of fun. I did, like I say, I noted, especially that verbally communicating down at the end, that was a very high percentage. Both groups thought that was extremely important. Okay, so what we're talking about here is, what's going on? What can we do to solve the problems that we're trying to look at? And, one of the things obvious here is that students need more skills if they're going to embark upon the real world. And, one of the things that Kyle and I agree upon is that it would be very easy for us in higher education to start weaving a lot of this into our curriculum. I already do it with a number of my, classes. Even though my class might be on marketing, we'll do an assignment. I have a series of assignments that I have the students do a short essay on what happens if I get caught with drunk driving. That's something that you don't really think about. How to eat a business meal. Oh, I can tell you some of the faux pas I've had with eating business meals. So, it's stuff like that that I think that we can kind of, start to weave that into our curriculum individually. And it really doesn't have to be just a business course that we're talking about, but it can be a science course. It can be an education course. It really can be any kind of course that would be. In fact, if somebody wants to throw out an idea there in the chat box, certainly would love to hear that. Kyle, thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and we can kind of see what people bring up in the chat box. But I think that there's a lot of skills about the real world, and some of them maybe don't fall into the education realm. So there are things that maybe don't necessarily, fall into, for example, it's like, how do you know a good apartment from a bad apartment?
Oh,
I don't expect any college teacher to teach that.
Sure.
I think that that's kind of a skill that kind of needs to be taught by a parent, but I do believe that if you are teaching a marketing class, it is possible to talk about which one of those marketing skills is most in demand.
Yeah.
If you're teaching, an education class, you're teaching other teachers, maybe you can talk to them about something that, is an issue there. So I think there's ways to work into it. I just think it's a complicated combination where everybody needs to kind of do their part.
I'm chuckling internally here because, I'm going to pat myself on the back here. When my daughter Sarah first relocated to New York City, I went apartment hunting with her, and she looked at this apartment on the Upper West Side that was about the size of a bathroom, and it was like, it was tiny and cost a lot of money, and it was like a 5-story walk up, and I was like, really? And she ended up in Hoboken and has a wonderful apartment there, and much larger, and is much more happier. So yeah, you're right about apartment hunting. That is something that I think definitely a parent should be doing. Interesting you say that. Some of the things we learned from this is, pretty obvious. We're seeing so many employers today who are coming to us and saying, hey, these students just don't know what the heck's going on. They're unable to take feedback from coworkers. They struggle to communicate with team members. They, like Kyle said, they can't resolve conflicts on their own. And that's really a very big obstacle that they have. I'd be interested to hear if anybody has any comments about that as we move forward. Kyle, do you have some thoughts about that? We've kind of talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah, I would say it appears as if more and more graduates are entering the workforce and they've never been given that constructive feedback. And I'm not really sure why that is. And maybe they have and they just weren't listening. But I think that, there's a difference between getting a feedback from a teacher and getting feedback from a boss. And I think part of the problem goes back to that, holding companies accountable for the type of internship experience they provide. Yes, you should be somewhat easy on your interns because they're learning, but you also need to, you can't handle them with kid gloves. They need to understand that if they did something wrong, like, they yell at them, obviously don't fire them, but, reprimand them to a point where they understand what they did wrong and how they can do it again, how they can do it better. Because a lot of what I've learned is I've worked in different companies where I've gone up to people and I said, well, what happened here? And they don't answer me. They just look at me, and it's just this awkward silence for 30 seconds because they know that they were wrong, but they don't know why would I call them out on it. Why am I not just ignoring it?
Yeah.
So I think that
sweep it under the carpet.
And what you can learn as a student here is that if you learn, from this day forward, you decide that you're going to commit yourself to understanding how to take feedback, understanding how to use that feedback, having that thick skin, that will set you apart. Because if a boss knows that he can, give you feedback and give you information, you can just run with it, and he doesn't have to worry about hurting your feelings, he's going to trust you more and more. And when he's got to promote somebody, it's going to be you instead of the snowflake you sit next to.
Good word, yes. And Kyle, you're absolutely right. I can't agree with you more. You really do have to have kind of leather skin in the corporate world or in the business world, because let me tell you what, people are going to be throwing darts at you all the time. And you also got to think about it this way. We're in a very highly competitive job market. There are, I know we've got with the setback with COVID right now as far as unemployment, but there are fewer people in the job pool than jobs available before the COVID. And so, it's hard to find the right people. And so, it's getting very competitive out there for people. And they will set you up for failure. Your colleagues will set you up for failure. I can tell you stories personally of colleagues of mine that I worked with would set me up for failure just so they could take my job. So pretty scary stuff. But it does happen. Couple of things, I'm kind of looking at the clock here. I see we've got about 5 minutes or so before we take some questions and everything. 83% of the employers said that organizational skills were essential. Again, struggle with the new job because they don't possess the skills to become and stay organized. Kyle, want to kind of mention that?
So I think one of the things I want to point out is I think a lot of companies do a poor job of onboarding. And I think
great one.
That, again, who do you blame, right? You can't blame the college for if the company doesn't have good onboarding. But I think the problem sometimes is that students think, okay, I have a new job and I'm going to be welcomed with open arms and that everything I need is going to be right there, and somebody's going to help me along the way because I've always had a teacher helping me along the way. And what happens is that you show up and you're dropped off at a desk, and half the people around don't even know that you were starting today.
Yeah.
And if you work at a disorganized company, because this has happened to me, people don't even know that they hired this position to begin with. So nobody has anything for you because they didn't even know you were coming in. And your computer doesn't work or it's not there. You don't have the logins you need. You don't understand where you're going. Everybody else is so busy they don't have time to teach you anything. Yeah. I'll tell you a story about a guy who showed up on his first day The person who hired him was supposed to train him called out sick, and he had nothing to do. And I literally and we worked in different departments. We worked for different brands. And I literally had him doing some of my stuff just so he didn't sit there miserable all day. And of course I got in trouble for that because he wasn't hired to do that, but whatever.
You know, it's funny you say this. My research on having fun at work, the number 2 reason people don't have fun at work is because they were not trained properly. They didn't know what they were doing. So onboarding, like Kyle says, is so important. And that burden is on the employer for that. Good points. You know, we had a number of people talk to us about how, you know, as an employer, they were getting calls from parents saying, hello, my son Jimmy works for your company and he's not happy there. Kyle?
That surprised me the most because that would not have happened even 10 years ago.
Oh boy.
I think parents doing a lot of things for their kids is a universal problem. But having parents call up, you know, jobs, you won't recover from that as an employee. I'm just warning you right now. You will not recover from that. That will get around the office. People will not be able to take you seriously. And to be honest with you, you need to have a relationship with your mom or dad so they know not to call your boss, to call your company. So I think that's something that really needs to be fixed very quickly. And that really did surprise me the most. And as far as parents doing too many things for their kids, from what I've learned, I think a lot of it is parents spend, 15 years doing things for their kids, and the kids become so comfortable with it that they don't really ever say stop. And the parents are so comfortable with it because that's their purpose in life, to serve for their kids, I guess, right? So nobody ever says, hey, like, this is going to become a problem until it's too late. So, I'm a lot more lenient on the second one with the parents because I think it's a learning process for everybody. But I would have no tolerance for parents calling on behalf of their child, because to me, that's unacceptable.
There's a nice note in there from Professor Wilson Grafus, who, by the way, is the next office over to me here. And but she's right. 18 times better with onboarding. Thanks for that. Thanks for that note. I think early on, Kyle, you were the one that said that blame is not going to solve the problem here. Really, we need to really look at all 3 parties involved here: the parents, the educators, and the students themselves. And all 3 parties do have to take some ownership to this. Really, parents need to be understanding to let go of the apron strings and let the kids, fend for themselves. And I'm a parent myself, and I still have a hard time doing that myself. But sometimes you got to let them do that. Here are some other reasons. I'm just looking at the time here, Kyle. I'm not sure how much time exactly we have, but I'm going to say 3 or 4 minutes. So why don't you talk about these conclusions?
Sure. So I think what's important, I'll kind of jump down to bullet point number 4, is students must be thinking about the next steps in life. A lot of times what I tell my clients who are high school students is that when you're in college, no matter where you are in college, you have to be thinking about what's going to happen after college. And the things you are doing, why are you there? Why are you doing it? Because to me, college is not just learning something new. You're learning something new to apply it somewhere down the road. There might be some electives that you're just learning to learn, but a lot of your classes, you're learning for a purpose. So don't have the attitude of, let me just get past this test. Let me just get through this class. Let me just, wake up 5 minutes before class, plot myself down, and hey, I was counted as here, so that counts. Because that's not going to service you. That's not going to help you. So I think that that's really important, because if you're thinking about being prepared for the workforce, then when you have that mindset, then when the Mount does an event about being prepared for the workforce, you attend it. When they bring in a speaker, or they do a webinar, or they do something along those lines, or they launch, courses or classes that talk about the things we're talking about, to take it because you're thinking, oh, I'm going to need that. I'm going to need to apply it into the real world.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want to come back to that. Elizabeth posted something in the chat that really was, very profound. We really do as educators, sometimes need to put our foot down on late assignments. I mean, in the real world, that not really very well tolerated. I know, like, I assess at least a 20-point penalty, but there are faculty members that say, no, I'm sorry, you get a 0. We don't want the assignment. One of the things I talk about with students is that what I like to say, that 15 minutes in front of your face, that's really all they're looking at right now. And they really need to step back and look at the big picture. I'm going to move to the next, I'm going to move to the question slide, but I see there's one more chat there. Good. Yes, thanks. So let's kind of, I'm not sure exactly how much time we have remaining, Barb. I've got us down at 1:45. And
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Go
ahead.
That let me put myself up here again. I think that we could have about 15 minutes or so for questions.
Beautiful.
I understand that some people will have to go. You have other commitments this afternoon. That's certainly understandable. No problem at all.
Great.
Was there anything else in the chat that you wanted to follow up with, or shall we just move into asking questions?
A little bit of both. I wanted to come back to Peter Gregory. Professor Gregory talks about how he emphasizes taking assertive position. Is very true. Final reports are great. One of the things I do with my interns is I have them actually write a blog about their weekly doings, because that is really a very valuable tool. My daughter Sarah was hired on the spot at the first marketing agency she worked for, because she said she had written a blog. Nobody in the college students are writing blogs, so here was a perfect opportunity, and she really was able to get her foot in the door that way. So yeah, that was a good point there, Professor Gregory. Like I say, there's some really good points in, if you would read the chats. Ludmilla, yes, I see that. I require a blog in every class. There you go. I wanted to come back to one point early on, some of the, and please excuse this term, the scut work that you're going to be challenged to do as an employee, as a recent grad. When the first advertising agency I worked for, I had been out of college maybe about a year and a half at the point, and I was working in radio, and so I got this job working as a copywriter for this ad agency, and it was about this time that I started, and one of the first assignments I got was I had to go get the turkeys for Thanksgiving. So I had to take everybody's orders for the turkeys, and we had like 50 people working for us. I had to take get all the orders for everybody's turkeys, how big of a turkey they wanted. I had to go use the company van and go drive to the grocery store, and I had to make all the arrangements with the grocery store. And then I had to bring them back and say, okay, Kyle, you get this turkey, and Ludmilla, you get this turkey, and Peter, you get this turkey. And so I kind of got the moniker of being the turkey boy, and I was like, what? This isn't what I was paid, what I'm paid to do. So yeah, exactly. I see there's a couple of points here. I'm
going to take advantage of my position as the host here and point out something. I don't know if it's a question or observation or combination of things. One of the things that I think may be underestimated by students is the opportunity presented to them by work study positions.
Oh.
Because granted, it's not an internship, so and work study assignments will vary greatly, and I understand that. But I think that students should have their eyes open to what really can be learned. And how to leverage that. We have the honor, I guess, of having a lot of students work for us as work study students in the library, a lot. And but we really use it as a training ground. I mean, we take it seriously, but of course we take it seriously with students who show enthusiasm for the opportunity that's presented to them. And, you mentioned, well, what did I learn by answering the phone in this, one of my internships? But what we have found is many students have never answered the phone on behalf of an organization. And so working in the library, that's one of the things that they learn to do, is how to answer the phone professionally, how to refer a phone call, you know, how to make some basic correct answers on the phone. And then we actually develop our students to the point where we hire some of them as outside of work study. We also have a student advisory group. So people want to be involved, want to be able to say that, you know, I organized a service activity for students, or we went from the library to the local public library and worked with students there. I mean, these are things that really can come from a work study opportunity. And I mean, I think many students aren't aware that they could be developed in such a way.
A question, great points. You know, you're right about work study. I mean, I worked in college, when I was in college undergraduate, I worked in work study. In fact, honestly, when I was working on my MBA 10 years ago, I was actually a researcher. I was a work study and loved that. That was a fantastic job, a research assistant. There's a great question, and thanks a lot, Professor Hossain, for your question about diverse was the population that was surveyed. It was pretty diverse overall. You know, we didn't do much in the way of demographics. We did break it out into employer, employee, and I think we might have broken it out by male, female, but we didn't really get into how, you know, we didn't get into ethnicities, we didn't get into races, we didn't get into specific industries. I will say that generally speaking, we did have a fairly diverse audience of age, race, different industries as well. I can't pinpoint and say we had this many from this group and this many from this group. We did try to keep it very, what's the word I want, very diverse. We had a very large sample in that we had people from not only this region in the Hudson Valley, but we also had people from New York City participate. We also had people from the upstate New York, the Capital District region were also, so it was geographically, it was also a fairly wide participatory net that we asked. Other questions that we would have? Somebody's typing. Oh, good. Okay, very good. Good. Thanks a lot, Professor Davin. Oh, wonderful. Okay. I see Professor Davin wrote about running the athletic department and how that applied to his working in the classroom. Yeah, wonderful point. And you know, there are so many of those points that we can learn from each other. You know, yeah, very good, very good. One of the things I learned was I used to work in the campus. We used to have a campus rat skeller, and I used to work there, and you know, handling and managing money certainly, you know, is important. Although today it's more, you know, credit card sales and electronically. Kyle, you've got some closing comments you want to talk about?
Sure. I mean, I would, before I do any closing comments, I would encourage students to ask any questions that they may have. I know that in my experience,
that's a good point.
When you get one, people start to have a little more courage and ask more. So, you know, definitely throw those in. But, you know, as far as my closing comments, I think in closing, I would just say that 10 years removed from college graduation, there are a lot of people in the workforce who are genuinely dissatisfied with the way their lives have turned out. And, you know, we heard Dr. Scardillo talk often about, are we having fun? The terms that I tend to use are satisfaction and fulfillment. And I use those terms because I understand that not every day is fun and not everything is going to make you happy. I think happy is subjective, but I think that you can find a career that makes you fulfilled. I think you can find a career that makes you satisfied. A lot of people talk about finding your passion. I don't think you find your passion. I think you figure out who you want to help and how can you do that. And when you figure those two things out, then you discover your passion and you pursue it. That's why I say discover your passion. It's a little different, but there's a method to it. So that would be my advice to, you know, students who are listening.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kyle. Some of the things I say to students is, I worked in the advertising marketing field for 30 years and really enjoyed what I did. But it wasn't until I started teaching part-time that I realized that this was something I was really passionate about. So I often will tell I'll tell students that say to me, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'll say, listen, I was 48 years old before I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. You're 20 something, don't worry about it. But I think that is key. I think that, there are many students today that are just looking at a big paycheck. And I think that that's not the right approach. I think you really have to kind of look at, are you going to be fulfilled with your job? Is it going to be something that you can grow into and have a fulfilling, and, it's interesting because there are so many different things that come into play. I've worked at other colleges and not had a great, I shouldn't say not a great experience at, but not had as good of an experience as I've had here at the Mount. So it's all got to line up. The company that you work for, the people you work with, and the passion that you have for the work that you're doing are very important as you move forward. Good points. Other questions that anybody may have? If anybody would like, the entire research is available, and I'm very happy. You can either just email me or Kyle, and we'd be very happy to share with you the overall data of our presentation. Like I say, there was a lot of data points in there in the side-by-side, that you would just I could hear people snoring if we included all that. So I wanted to kind of stay away from that. Anything else, Kyle, you want to add? Kind of feel we're getting close to that 2 o'clock magic hour.
Looks like most folks have run the gamut of their questions.
Okay.
I do want to thank everyone again for being with us. This is really, really interesting, and I think relevant to all of us on so many different levels, as thinking back to our own college, how we felt after we got out of college and having those early employment experiences as teachers and as parents, etc. So it's very eye-opening for sure.
Yeah.
So thank you both, Dr. Scardillo and Kyle. Really, really appreciate it. It's a great presentation.